Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
Usually when you look at a bank account, there is this heavy expectation of mathematical certainty.
Right. Yeah, it acts like an accounting ledger.
Exactly. You check the balance, and the number is just printed right there in black and white, and you just point at it and say, well, that's what I have.
It's binary. I mean, you're either rich or you're broke. It's clean and totally quantifiable.
Right, because we crave that tangibility. It gives us a sense of control,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if the number on the screen is terrifying, human beings generally prefer a hard, uncomfortable fact over some malleable unknown.
But then you step into the world of theology when it intersects with the psychology of wealth, and suddenly that rigid ledger is it's thrown out the window entirely.
Yeah. You find yourself looking at a financial and personal landscape that is completely malleable.
Which is wild. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our source material today is a really vibrant, extensive sermon delivered at the House on the Rock Sunday service.
And that was in Lagos, Nigeria, right?
Yes, on July 5, 2026. And the context here is vital. The pastor is addressing a massive congregation that is facing some very real, very punishing economic headwinds.
Yeah, inflation, systemic hurdles.
Exactly. So our mission today is to distill this dense, multifaceted message down to its absolute core. We're going to treat this as a fascinating psychological framework for overcoming limitations.
We'll unpack the key scriptures he uses to support it, the central spiritual truths, and most importantly, extract the concrete, practical habits he calls the listener to apply.
Because the environment of this sermon really shapes its delivery. I mean, preaching about abundance in a thriving economy is one thing.
Right, it's easy. Yeah. But preaching a message of limitless potential to a congregation actively dealing with crushing inflation, that requires a completely different mechanical approach.
He can't just offer platitudes. He has to offer a functional strategy.
Yeah, he really does.
So if you've ever felt like you have more month at the end of your money than money at the end of your month, we're going to explore a radical perspective shift today on how to view those obstacles.
It's a fascinating reframe.
It really is. Let's start with the origin story of lack. Because before a person can break down their current financial or personal barriers, the pastor insists they have to understand where the very concept of limitation comes from.
And he bypasses modern economics entirely here.
Totally. He takes the congregation straight back to the beginning of the biblical narrative.
Right out of the gate, he makes this foundational assertion: the vast majority of the limitations we live with are actually mindsets that are more imagined than they are physically real.
Which is a bold claim to make to a struggling crowd.
It really is. But to prove it, he directs the congregation to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, and Genesis chapter 2. And he paints this highly detailed picture of God's original blueprint for humanity.
Which was the Garden of Eden.
Exactly. And he goes out of his way to emphasize that Eden wasn't just, a pleasant park with some fruit trees.
Right, it was an ecosystem.
A total ecosystem of absolute, overwhelming abundance, protection, and productivity. He specifically highlights the river Pishon and the gold of Havilah.
Oh, right. Pointing out that the scripture explicitly notes the gold was good.
Yeah. The overarching point he's establishing is the baseline. God's original operating system for humanity never included poverty or lack or just scraping by.
Okay, so establishing that baseline is crucial for his next point. Right. Because then he frames the fall of man in Genesis 3.
Yes, and he frames it not just as a story about a magical fruit or a talking snake, but as this masterclass in shifting human perception.
A masterclass. I love that phrasing.
Well, think about the physical environment. Eve is surrounded by thousands of trees representing infinite abundance. But the serpent's strategy is entirely psychological.
He forces her to fixate on the one single tree in the entire ecosystem that represents lack and restriction.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Exactly. And the serpent didn't physically remove the thousands of other trees. He didn't alter the abundance of the garden at all.
He just performed a forced cognitive tunneling.
Yes. By getting Eve to focus exclusively on the one thing she couldn't have, the psychological insight becomes profound. Lack became her reality simply because lack became her focus.
It's the ultimate camera lens analogy.
Right. It's like if you have a beautiful sweeping landscape in front of you, but there's a tiny dark smudge right in the center of your camera lens.
What happens if you adjust your focus to that smudge?
The beautiful landscape just blurs out into nothing. You become completely blind to it.
Yeah, that smudge is the only thing in sharp definition, so that smudge becomes your entire world.
And you will swear with absolute certainty that the smudge is all that exists. You'll defend your limitation because it's the only thing you can clearly see.
It's a really powerful analogy.
It is, but I mean, the smudge analogy makes total sense for theoretical garden.
Sure.
But a smudge on a lens is very different from a 50% rent hike in modern-day Legos, right? Or a medical bill you can't pay, or an inflation rate that's just devouring your savings.
It feels much more concrete.
Exactly. So how does the pastor realistically translate this ancient story to a crushing modern economy?
Well, he addresses that translation by moving directly into the realm of spiritual warfare. But he radically redefines what that warfare actually looks like.
How so?
He doesn't treat poverty and inflation merely as macroeconomic realities of the Nigerian government. He frames them as deliberate spiritual attacks.
Wow.
Yeah, he literally calls them Satan's weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction. I mean, that implies an intention to obliterate, not just inconvenience.
And that intentionality is key to his framework. He roots this concept in two specific scriptures. The first is John 10:10, which states, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy."
Okay, the classic verse.
Right. But the pastor provides this fascinating reinterpretation of the mechanics of a thief. I mean, an armed robber doesn't just randomly attack any house on the street.
A thief calculates risk.
Exactly. They only rob a house if it appears to be an easy target. If a house is heavily guarded, well-lit, fortified, the thief moves on to an easier victim.
They calculate the energy expenditure versus the potential payoff.
Right. And then he pairs that thief analogy
Sure.
with 1 Peter 5:8, which describes the enemy as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour.
Seeking whom he may devour.
Yes. The pastor pauses and puts all the emphasis on the word may. A lion in the wild does not hunt the strongest, most alert gazelle in the herd. It hunts the weak, the isolated, the oblivious.
So the lion can only devour who it can devour.
Exactly. The central spiritual truth he delivers here is a paradigm shift in self-defense. If you change your mindset, you build spiritual and psychological fortifications. You make yourself, in his vocabulary, undevourable.
Undevourable. Wait, so if you are getting devoured by these economic weapons of mass destruction, the implication is that you made yourself edible, like you left the doors unlocked.
Well, he is careful not to blame the victim for the macroeconomy.
Right, that would be harsh.
Yeah, but he insists on personal agency. He acknowledges that you cannot single-handedly fix the national inflation rate. You can't alter the geopolitical landscape. So since you cannot shrink the problem, the only viable strategy is to outgrow the problem by drastically increasing your own internal and external value.
Okay, that makes sense.
In fact, he explicitly distances himself from the traditional label of a prosperity preacher and calls himself a productivity preacher.
Okay, I have to push back on that distinction a bit because it is incredibly easy for a religious leader with a microphone to stand on a stage and tell a struggling, exhausted congregation to just think differently about their lack of money.
It is a common critique.
Right. So how does this productivity preaching tangibly differ from the sometimes controversial prosperity gospel? What is the actual mechanism for generating wealth in the real world under this framework?
That's a great question, and the source material draws a hard line there. The traditional prosperity gospel often leans heavily on transactional faith.
Like the idea of sudden miraculous wealth appearing simply through belief or financial donations to the church?
Yes, the mechanism there is passive expectation. You just wait for a miracle. But this pastor's productivity preaching is fiercely grounded in expanding human capital. The mechanism is the active creation of tangible value.
Oh, interesting.
He tells the congregation, if you're going to work anything, work your mind. He champions gaining knowledge, seeking exposure to better information, upskilling, taking calculated business risks.
So the wealth isn't just magically dropping through the ceiling?
No, not at all. His premise is that true wealth chases value. If you aggressively increase your internal value, your business acumen, your emotional intelligence, specialized skills, you literally become too big for the container of poverty to hold you.
You force the economy to interact with you differently because you are no longer an easy target.
Exactly. You are bringing undeniable utility to the marketplace.
Okay, but if outgrowing the problem through perception and productivity is the goal, How does someone actually do that in real time when they are actively under attack?
Well, the sermon uses a series of dramatic scriptural case studies to prove this works. And what really stands out is that in every single story, the physical threat never shrinks.
The perception of the threat is what transforms.
Yes. Let's analyze the first case study, which is 2 Kings 6. The prophet Elisha and his servant are in the city of Dothan. They wake up in the morning, step outside, and find themselves entirely surrounded by a massive hostile Syrian army.
Chariots, horses, armed troops ready to siege the city.
Right. And the servant looks at this valley and goes into a complete panic. I mean, he is experiencing a full amygdala hijack.
Which, to be fair to the servant, is a completely rational, biologically appropriate reaction to an invading army. His data set says, we are outnumbered, we are unarmed, we are going to die.
It's entirely rational based on the limits of his perception. But Elisha looks at the exact same valley, the exact same hostile army, and his central nervous system is completely calm.
He's operating from a place of executive function.
Why? Because his data set is larger. Elisha prays for his servant's eyes to be opened, and suddenly the servant perceives an invisible, fiery, angelic host surrounding the Syrian army.
Oh, wow.
The Syrian army didn't retreat. Their weapons didn't disappear. The physical problem remained identical. But the servant's perception of what was actually happening shifted completely, and that cognitive reframing neutralized his terror.
It changes the risk assessment from we are under attack to they are trapped.
Exactly.
And he uses the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel 17 to illustrate the exact same cognitive reframe, doesn't he?
He does.
Because you have the entire Israeli military apparatus, trained veteran warriors, looking at a 9-foot-tall, heavily armed giant. Their collective perception calculates the risk-to-reward ratio and determines it is catastrophic. They're like, he's a wall. He's too big to fight. If we engage, we die.
They are fixated on the smudge on the lens.
Totally. Then a 16-year-old shepherd boy walks onto the battlefield. David doesn't have military training. He doesn't even have armor that fits him.
Right.
But he looks at the exact same giant, and his cognitive framework turns a threat into a resource. David looks at Goliath and calculates, he is so massive, he's a target too big to miss with a catapult.
It is the ultimate pivot from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. The army saw an immovable obstacle. David saw an unprecedented opportunity for promotion.
Yeah.
But the third case study might be the most psychologically complex of the three, because it deals with what happens when you are utterly helpless.
Okay, let's get into it.
In Acts 12, the Apostle Peter is in a maximum security prison. He is scheduled to be publicly executed the very next morning. Meanwhile, the early church is gathered in a house, desperately praying through the night for a miracle to save his life.
The church is frantic, but what is Peter doing? He is fast asleep in his cell.
Yes.
He is sleeping so deeply between two guards that an angel physically has to strike him on the side to wake him up. That level of rest implies either extreme cognitive dissonance or a state of total radical surrender to his circumstances.
And the mechanics of his escape are fascinating. As Peter follows the angel through the prison, the text specifically notes that the heavy iron gates open of their own accord.
Automatic doors in antiquity.
Right. Peter walks out a free man, navigates the city streets, and knocks on the door of the very house where the church is holding this massive, desperate prayer meeting for his release.
This is where human psychology is just put on full display. A young girl named Rhoda goes to the gate, hears Peter's voice, and is so overwhelmed with excitement that she forgets to unlock the door.
She just leaves him standing there.
She leaves him in the street and runs back inside to interrupt the prayer meeting, announcing, Peter is at the door. And how does the church, the group of people who have been literally losing sleep praying for this exact outcome, respond to her?
They tell her she has lost her mind. They argue with her. They conclude it must be his ghost or his angel. I mean, anything but the actual answer to their prayer.
They prayed for a miracle, but their internal mindset was so deeply entrenched in the expectation of tragedy and limitation that their brains literally could not process the victory when it arrived.
It's tragic, really.
It's the equivalent of religiously tracking a package you desperately need. You're refreshing the app every 5 minutes. You see the truck icon on the map pull up to your street. You get the notification that says, delivered.
But you refuse to turn the handle on your front door because you are absolutely convinced the tracking app must be glitching.
Exactly. You are so conditioned to disappointment that you cannot accept the good thing has actually manifested. It forces anyone listening to ask a very uncomfortable question.
Which is?
What door in your own life are you refusing to open out of a deeply ingrained defense mechanism of disbelief?
It is a profound self-audit. And this moves the sermon into its final, most critical segment.
Right.
Theology, behavioral psychology, and ancient stories are inspiring. But if someone is listening to this and they buy into the reframing, but tomorrow morning their bank balance is still negative, what is the pastor actually asking them to do?
How do they cross the bridge from theory to reality?
Exactly.
Well, the pastor outlines a few highly specific practical takeaways. The first directive is that you must actively cultivate what he calls weapons of mass production.
A deliberate counteroffensive to the weapons of mass destruction we discussed earlier.
Exactly that. This means intentionally, aggressively upgrading your beliefs, your expectations, and your exposure. To ground this in reality, the pastor uses a modern business example.
The one about Aliko Dangote.
Yes, the Nigerian industrialist and billionaire. The pastor sets up a scenario where Dangote needs a $10 million bridge loan to secure a much larger $100 million deal. Dangote simply makes a phone call to a banker in Paris, asks for the $10 million, and it's wired and approved in hours.
And the contrast the pastor draws here is essential for understanding this idea of capacity. He tells the congregation that an ordinary person would be psychologically crushed by the idea of carrying $10 million in debt.
It would induce panic attacks.
Right. Their internal container is too small to handle those numbers. But Dangote's mindset has been expanded through exposure and experience to the point where $10 million isn't a terrifying burden. It is simply a mechanical tool used to unlock a larger asset.
But for the listener who isn't a billionaire industrialist, how does a normal person expand that capacity? Most of us are dealing with the cognitive tax of just trying to get by.
This is where we see a perfect overlap with behavioral economics, specifically the concepts of scarcity versus abundance mindsets.
Oh, right.
Research shows that living in a state of scarcity, whether that's a lack of money, time, or calories, literally reduces your brain's cognitive bandwidth. You make poorer decisions because your executive function is consumed by immediate survival.
You are focused on the smudge on the lens.
Yes. So expanding your capacity means actively fighting that biological urge to tunnel your vision. It means reading outside your field, networking with people who operate at a higher level than you, and forcing your brain to conceptualize larger numbers and bigger opportunities until they stop feeling foreign and terrifying.
That requires serious intentionality, which leads right into his second practical action, which is aligning your mouth with your mind.
Right.
The pastor is adamant that true wealth and transformation are triggered by spoken declarations. He tells the congregation, you are one mouth-spoken word away from your big overflow.
It's a very bold statement.
It is. The practical habit he's demanding is an end to the culture of complaint. Stop talking about how bad the inflation is. Stop bonding with your neighbors over how terrible the rent prices are. Start actively speaking abundance and possibility into your environment.
And there is a strong cognitive behavioral therapy principle at work here. Your self-talk literally shapes your neural pathways. If you constantly vocalize your limitations, you reinforce the reality of those limitations in your brain.
So by forcing yourself to speak declarations of abundance, you begin to rewrite that internal programming.
Exactly. It creates a cognitive dissonance at first, but eventually your actions align with your words.
Which brings us to the final and really the most physically tangible action of the service, the covenant of communion. The pastor transitions the thousands of people in the room into taking the physical bread and wine. But he doesn't treat it as a somber, passive memorial of a historical event. He weaponizes it.
He connects it directly to this entire teaching on breaking limitations and generating productivity.
Yes. He draws a parallel to the famous gospel story of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He points out the mechanics of that miracle, placing the little you possess, the very symbol of your lack and inadequacy, into the hands of the master, removes its limitations entirely,
resulting in a super unlimited overflow.
And he takes it a step further by connecting the physical suffering of Jesus to the congregation's current economic and physical realities. He asserts that the 39 lashes Jesus took at the whipping post are directly, tangibly correlated to the healing of physical diseases and the repairing of financial brokenness.
So by eating the bread and drinking the wine, they are ritually enacting the destruction of their limitations.
It is a powerful theological statement, but it also serves an incredibly vital psychological function.
It really does.
So why is that physical ritual so necessary? I mean, if the entire core of this message is about changing your internal psychology, upgrading your mindset, and reframing your perception, why can't a person just meditate on those concepts? Why do they need to eat a wafer and drink grape juice?
Because of a concept called embodied cognition.
Embodied cognition.
Yeah, the human mind is incredibly stubborn. Abstract concepts like abundance or reframing can easily drift away the moment you step outside and see the price of gas.
Right, reality hits.
Physical touch points serve as profound biological anchors for cognitive shifts. When you introduce a physical action, holding a piece of bread, feeling its texture, tasting the wine, swallowing it while making a conscious, vocalized declaration, you are engaging multiple physical senses to solidify an invisible psychological concept.
It takes the idea out of the theoretical realm and plants it in your physical body.
Exactly. The ritual acts as a psychological line in the sand. It tells the brain the shift has occurred. There's no going back.
It bridges the gap between the invisible mindset and the physical world.
Beautifully said.
So let's pull all of these threads together. This has been a massive journey through ancient texts and modern psychology. We explored the origin of limitation, looking at how the illusion of lack started all the way back in the Garden of Eden through a forced shift in focus.
And we examined the framework for reframing poverty and inflation, not just as economic stats, but as spiritual attacks that a person can outgrow by becoming a highly productive individual of immense value.
We dissected the mechanics of shifting perception through the case studies of Elisha neutralizing a panic attack by seeing a larger data set.
David turning a terrifying threat into a massive opportunity.
And the tragedy of a church whose defense mechanisms wouldn't allow them to open the door to their own answered prayer.
Which is such a striking image. And finally, we locked in on the practical applications, fighting the cognitive tax of scarcity by expanding your internal capacity to handle bigger concepts.
Aligning your spoken words with your upgraded mindset.
And utilizing embodied cognition, like the communion table, to anchor those internal changes in physical reality.
Because the foundational psychological principle underlying all of this remains unshakable. What you focus on expands.
Yes.
If you dedicate your cognitive bandwidth to the tree of lack obsessing over your debts, your physical limitations, the macroeconomy, that dark smudge on your camera lens, you will inevitably blind yourself to the vast, sprawling ecosystem of opportunity that exists right around you.
It's all about where you put your attention.
Which brings us to a final, slightly different thought for you to chew on as we close out this deep dive. We've spent a lot of time talking about the serpent in Eden, forcing Eve to focus on the one tree of lack. But think about our modern environment.
Oh, this is a good point.
Every time we open our phones, we are engaging with algorithms that are mathematically optimized to feed us outrage, fear, and scarcity.
Yeah, the news cycle, the social media feeds.
They are quite literally a modern-day tree of the knowledge of good and evil designed to keep us fixated on the smudge on the lens.
It is a constant, automated cognitive tunneling.
Exactly. So if it is true that our physical realities are shaped by our perceptions, and our perceptions are shaped by our focus, what are we doing to our own capacity when we willingly consume a digital diet of limitation every single day?
Are we building our own prisons and then complaining that we can't get out?
It's something to really think about before you start scrolling tonight. Keep your eyes open, protect your focus, and don't forget to open the door when the package finally arrives. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.